It's a privilege and a pleasure to be here. I enjoyed my last visit and it opens my eye to the whole food plant-based diet. And back in September, I was still what we call a normal eater. And I would consider myself a foodie. And in fact, my title of my talk is my food journey in intermittent fasting. Now, I want to share with you some personal experience. And I don't claim to be an expert in nutrition science. I don't claim to be an expert in everything to do with how to lose weight. I'm not any of that. I am a lung specialist and then a sleep specialist. But I do think what you eat determines how your health is going to be in the long term. As much as I believe sleep is also a vital part of your health maintenance. But be as it may, I'm going to try to tell you my personal journey. It's for me, but I would like to share with you some of the signs that I learned as I go along. So next slide, please. So I'd like to share with you a little bit of my upbringing because that gives you an insight into why I make the switch. So my family, originally my father and my mother were from Asia, from Hong Kong, my father and my mother from China. And I was born in Hong Kong. I was born and raised in Hong Kong until I was 18. So that was in the 1950s all the way to the early 70s. Hong Kong at that time was exciting. You grow up as multicultural. It was a food paradise. I was able to eat all kinds of food, Chinese, American, French, you name it, Middle Eastern. Everything was within literally walking distance and a short commute from my home. So I grew up thinking food was the reason for being. I was born to eat. And I still believe to this day that I was born to do that. Now, I also know people who said, well, I eat to live. So, well, that's a different philosophy too, but none of them is more valid than the other. But having been a foodie, that's what I would call myself still, and then looking at my parents, they love, enjoy food. In fact, the whole idea of getting together as a family sitting down was to have a meal. In fact, the thing that we like to kid each other is after the food is all gone, we all get up and leave. So that's been the way it is. In fact, to this day, with my own family, when we get together, one of the main reasons have a good meal, right? So, my wife happens to also be a very good cook, and then she makes a very good Thanksgiving dinner. So we've been having people come over for decades to enjoy the food. But having that as a background, I would move a little bit further down the road. I left Hong Kong at 18. I went to Canada. I went to college there and subsequently medical school. And then I moved to the United States. During that process, because I was a student, food was not so much in abundance. I was limited to what I could afford, which at those times was not a whole heck of a lot. But after I moved to the United States, started working first as an intern and as a resident, was able to enjoy the food a bit more. In between, I left on an exchange scholarship to China. I was in China for 2 years in the early 80s, and that was an interesting time. Now keep in mind, China was going through something called the Cultural Revolution. So it started in 1966 to 1976. For 10 years, the whole country was turned upside down. There was all kinds of political upheaval. People were persecuting one another. The whole culture was really turned on its head. And because of all this, there was a lot of poverty. There was not really much food available. So I was going on the heel of that in China for 2 years. And there was hardly any meat. That was a real luxury. So I, for 2 years, really had mostly a plant-based diet. I didn't know it at the time, but looking back. And when I left China and came back home through Hong Kong, my parents looked at me, thought I was cachectic, thought I was somehow, in terrible shape. But funny enough, when I was in China, I was biking everywhere. I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of China movies in the 60s and 70s. What did they do? massive amount of bicycles, right? And also what they do, they wear these blue mouth jackets. Everybody looks the same, right? There's hardly any car whatsoever. So every day to go anywhere, I would be biking back and forth. So I was on the plant-based diet. I was exercising almost every day. I was in the best shape of my life. I came out, I was probably 10 pounds lighter than I am right now, and I could probably run for miles. So it is funny how it is, but you don't know that when you're in the midst of all that. So, and I thought that was important because it's going to relate to what happened to me later. So, as I was going through medical school and subsequently my fellowship, initially I was interested, well, I'm an internist first and foremost. What internist means is a doctor of internal medicine, someone who cares for adults' diseases. And then, because the demographic is shifting more to the senior population, you end up dealing mostly with elderly patients with chronic diseases, diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and so on and so forth, right? So because of that, we've seen patients who actually started having problems because of these chronic conditions. So initially I was young and excited about, oh, what can I do to make the most difference? I thought, well, take the sickest patient and treat them. If you can make them better, then you will make a difference, right? So that was the idealistic part of a young doctor. So, well, what can you do to make a difference? Well, it found out that if your kidneys are not doing well, people die. But then they come along, we can make artificial kidneys. We can make kidney machines that purify the blood and make people better. Now, I happen to also like numbers. So when you are a nephrologist, a kidney specialist, then you turn out that you can really take a person who's dying from kidney failure, put them on a dialysis machine, and literally in a few hours, turn them around. They couldn't breathe, they're terrible, they're gonna die from suffocation. Put them on a machine, you take out 5 liters of fluid, all of a sudden they can breathe again. Magical. And you can actually sit down and calculate exactly what you need to do to get them better. So that was exciting. So I thought, well, this is the thing I wanted to do. Well, I did a year of kidney fellowship, but also early on in the process I realized you can help them get better one time, but in a few days, in the same predicament again. Because the kidneys, they don't function, right? You can bring them back to the way it was. So then I realized, well, maybe dealing with patients that never really got better wasn't as satisfying as I thought it would be. And then I thought, well, I've seen people with asthma problem, lung problem. If they couldn't breathe, I could go in and do something. In a very short time, they got much better. And maybe I can do something to get the lungs turned around. So I got interested in something called intensive care. So these are people who are dying on the verge of really leaving this world. And literally because of intervention of the medical team, they got better. In fact, after a few days, they leave the ICU, the intensive care unit, and literally go home. So I thought that was the greatest thing there was. So I actually did 2 years of fellowship in pulmonary medicine, and part of that was what we call intensive care. And that for me was the most appealing. Again, it's number driven. I can sit down, I can make calculations. I say, this is what I'm going to do, and this is the outcome. And lo and behold, most of the time, that's what it was. So I thought, wow, medicine is really science. After a while, been doing this, and then I realized, you know what? People do get better. They do leave the hospital. But after a few months, they come back. Maybe not exactly the same thing, but something that brought them back because the body is broken. So after doing that for a while, I realized, maybe we can do something to do changes in them that will prevent them from being bad to begin with. So there are 2 ways of looking at medical prevention. One is called primary prevention, the other is called secondary prevention. And what are they? Well, primary prevention is doing something so early because you recognize if you don't do something, bad outcomes will follow. The other is you have a bad outcome, and then you do something to prevent it from being worse. Now, which one do you think is better? Right. But in the United States, what do you think we're very good at? Secondary prevention. That's what I was involved in. That was sort of the exciting part. That was a part that really is sort of adrenaline driven. And if you ask any doctor right now, especially young doctors, they want secondary prevention because that's when they think that the science of medicine can be applied. And yes, a lot of time we are doing this because that's where the research is. But having practiced medicine for long enough, I realized the primary prevention is really what can make a difference in people's life. And when you can really help them, and not just one person, the whole family, it makes a huge difference. If you prevent someone from getting a stroke and a heart attack, you maintain their health. How is that going to affect their family, their friends, their community? So I thought that, for me, is the most appealing. It's funny how my journey is as a doctor evolved over time. And I happen to be fortunate enough, I practiced all these different types of medicine in my youth all the way into the sort of towards the last third of my career. But the good thing is, that's where wisdom comes in. I was fortunate enough to be able to sort of switch gear. And I think if we can share one thing with all of you, is that when you go home, think about what you can change fundamentally to make your health better. Not just today, but in the long haul. So, having had that realization, something happened to me about a year ago. I was exercising, I'm involved in martial art, and I've been doing that for 20 years almost, and I hurt myself. And, well, it's not surprising. When you exercise, you hurt yourself. But this time is different. After I hurt myself, actually, I had pain that doesn't seem to go away so easily. So I know exactly what it was. It was what we call a medial meniscus tear. Those of you who have knee problem, it's your meniscus, which is the cartilage that softens the impact of the pressure on the knee joint. So if there's a crack, then there is some pain. But usually these things get better, right? You figure, well, after a month, 2 months, it gets better. And then for me, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 6 months went by, still hurting. And I couldn't do the martial art anymore. I was playing golf. I couldn't do golf anymore because it hurts. And then I was waking up at night with pain. And then I really sort of empathized with my patient who had chronic pain. For the first time in my life, I was having chronic pain. So I said, well, that's no good. So I went to my favorite physical therapist. We did exercises. I even went to acupuncture. They did acupuncture. There was some improvement, but not a dramatic difference. I took some herbal medicine. So at that point in time, I say, I'm not going to have surgery. So let's think about what I used to do that was keeping me well. And then I realized I was lighter. I wasn't as heavy. I was exercising. And also, I was eating a little bit differently. And then so happened, I watched a video in Netflix. I almost, rarely ever watch these videos, but for some reason that night I decided to watch it. And I was looking around, I saw this game called The Game Changer, this movie, this documentary. And I said, okay, well, let's watch it. And well, it turns out it was about this mixed martial art fighter who got hurt. He got knee problem. I said, I can identify with that. In fact, he got it much worse than me. He got bilateral knee surgery. And then he started interviewing people who are on whole food plant-based diet. And some of these are elite athletes. One of the strongest men around was a plant eater. Wait a minute. Why is that? Well, if you look around, the strongest animals, the biggest animals, elephants, hippopotamus, and so on, what are they? Vegetarian, right? So if they are so strong, and they eat only plants. Why couldn't human beings? So I said, oh, that's interesting. So I'm not saying at that time I was totally convinced, but I thought there is something different about what you eat and also, how you take care of yourself going forward. So I've always believed in exercises. Because I'm a sleep specialist, I also take care of how many hours I sleep. But at the same time, I think changing my food choices would make a difference. So I started reading a little bit more about whole food plant-based diet versus meat-based diet. And certainly, meat-based diet tends to be pro-inflammatory. And plant-based diet, there are evidence that is anti-inflammatory. So, well, let's give it a try. So I can't say that I'm 100% plant-based at the time. I would say it was 80, 90% plant-based. My wife can attest to that. And then within probably about 4 weeks or so, I lost about 5 pounds. And all of a sudden, the pain started going down. So, I wouldn't think that 5 pounds would make a big difference. But I was talking to my orthopedic colleagues. They said, oh, for every pound you lose, there's 5 pounds of pressure per square inch off your knee. So it's a 1-to-5 ratio. It's a pretty good return on investment, right? So for 5 pounds loss, it's 25 pounds off your knees. Great. So on top of that, I start feeling good, really good. So I said, okay, well, we'll start playing golf. And sure enough, it doesn't hurt. And I carry my bag and I push carts and I go 5 miles, 6 miles easily in a round of 18 holes of golf. And then I was good enough that about a month ago, I went back to doing martial art again. And I don't wake up with pain. So for me, that was really a big revelation, that maybe there is something really special about a whole food plant-based diet. So I call myself a flexitarian now. I'm not saying that I'm 100% plant-based. I'm still a foodie. I still love eating, seafood and a little bit of meat, but very little by and large. Some poultry, although yesterday, who has gone to the whole conference, right? So I'm a lot more leery about poultry now. 50% fat, that's a lot of fat. But I was also informed that if you have better raised chicken, perhaps the fat content is not going to be as high. But nonetheless, I think what you eat and what you put in your body does make a difference. May I have the next slide? So I'm a big fan of Michael Pollan. Which one of you have heard of Michael Pollan? Great. So Michael Pollan is a journalist. A very good writer. He also happens to have a special interest in food. And he actually did a lot of research, interviewed a lot of scientists, and he came up with just this very simple rule, 7 words. Eat food, not too much, mostly plants. And that's what I follow. So we try to eat whole food, real food, and he has some other rules. Can we show the next slide? So more food rules, and it's a little bit hard to read, but I'll say it out to you. Avoid highly processed food, right? So food that comes from Mars, all these different factories that turns out food that are in packages, lots of these have what we call high fructose corn syrup. And that, unfortunately, is something that is very bad for your body. And what happened a lot of time is when you eat these very high sugar-containing content that spikes up your blood sugar, next thing you know, your insulin goes up to bring the sugar down. The problem is the high insulin, as it brings your sugar down, makes you feel hungry. So next thing you know, you want to eat some more. So it's an ongoing problem. And that, if you have a tendency to have diabetes, you're going to develop diabetes because your habit of eating these foods lead to worsening of your blood sugar control. So another thing he said is, do like vegetables, fruit, and whole grains. So you said, well, you have sugar in fruit. What's the difference? The sugar in fruit is bound with fiber. So the glycemic index, that is the amount of sugar that is coming into your body, is slow compared to these highly processed candy bars. And your body, when it sees a lot of sugar, what it wants to do is bring it down. See, there's a thing called homeostasis in your body. That is, when there's a push, there's a pull to try to equilibrate or negate some of the pressure or unnatural things you do to your body. So when you have high blood sugar, then you have insulin. The insulin is moving the sugar in the body to form into the fat cells. So now you have a huge amount of fat storage because your sugar keeps coming in. And because the high insulin makes you feel hungry, you're going to continue to eat more. There's no end to this, right? So when you have people actually that eat a lot, the next thing you know is they want to sleep. So this food coma and the lack of productivity and eating more, all tied in, is a vicious cycle. So if you look at buying food from the store, it's very important you read the label. See what you're buying. When you have food, at least on the label, that is polysyllabic, that is 4 or 5 syllables long, and you can't pronounce most of them, you don't know what it is, think twice before you buy it, right? So avoid food products that contain high fructose corn syrup. That's something is a must. You got to read that and be careful. Shop at the peripheral of the supermarkets because that's where the fruit and vegetables are. Inside is where the processed food with packages, that's where you sit in the middle. So stay in the outside, don't go in. Buy at a farmer's market rather than a supermarket. Very simple, because it's local, it's more sustainable, it's fresh, and things you buy in the farmer's market, generally there's an expiration date. You can eat them by a certain time because they're fresh. If it's processed, what happens is they take all the ingredients out that can, go rancid. So if an insect doesn't want to eat it, why would you, right? So also, if it comes from a plant, eat it. If it was made in a plant, don't, right? I mean, it's simple. I mean, the guy is really smart. I think make simple, easy to understand recommendation. This is all from Michael Pollan. So none of the things I said today is really original. I'm actually taking some of the things I learned that I read and I found useful in sharing with you. Next, please. So I also have done something for quite a while, and I incorporate that into my new whole food, plant-based diet modified. And this is called intermittent fasting. So I've been a fan of Mark Mattson for a long time. Mark Mattson is a food scientist, and he's done research in intermittent fasting for a long time. The reason I bring it to your attention is that in December of 2019, there's a review article published in the New England Journal of Medicine on intermittent fasting. Now, in New England Journal of Medicine is the premier medical journal in the world. Only 5% of the articles submitted is actually published. So 95, 100 is rejected. And they're published in some other journals. So by the time you made it to New England Journal of Medicine, you are the best of the best. So he actually made it. And this is only about 2 months ago. So when I read it, I said, bingo, this is it. Now this is the right time and place to really promote it because he advocated that we should teach the concept of intermittent fasting in medical school. And there has been 30 plus years of research, starting with animals, that if you reduce the caloric intake to animals and non-human primates, you actually increase their lifespan. They have less incidence of heart disease, high blood pressure, spike in blood sugar or glucose intolerance, and even certain tumors. So this is really exciting news, and now there's some clinical data that support that. So increase in lifespan will reduce food intake anywhere from 20 to 30% reduction in food intake. Also increase resistance of the cells and organs to stress, all kinds of stress, whether it is stress from increased exposure to extreme changes in temperatures, injury, trauma, or infections. So the body is more resilient. And also there is a thing called metabolic switching. So turns out that the body can use two different sources of energy. Glucose, you heard of, sugar. So that comes from eating food. But the other one is from the breakdown of fat cells content. And what it does is the fat cells content is in the form called triglyceride. So it's broken down into something called fatty acids and also glycerol. And they actually form something called the ketones. So the ketones is something that can go through what we call the blood-brain barrier. There's an area that protects the brain, that makes sure the brain is not influenced by whatever you take in that can poison it. But the ketone bodies can go in and be used as energy. So if you fast long enough, the glucose in your body is exhausted. The glucose is very little storage in the bloodstream. There's a bigger storage area in the liver, called glycogen. But in about 12 hours or so of fasting, it's exhausted. But luckily, most of us won't collapse in a coma after that 12 hours because your fatty acids start getting broken down into ketone bodies, and your body uses the ketone bodies. What's the big deal about that? Well, it turns out not only do you switch on the ketone bodies for energy, you also tell the rest of the body that you should start having a different way of helping yourself stay together. So if you eat, you have lots of food coming in the form of glucose, fat, the body says, great, I have energy source. I'm going to make more cells. I'm going to start growing. I'm going to start making you stronger. Great, good concept. But when you're doing that, you're also increasing what we call mitosis, cell division. And when you start doing more and more of that, sometimes things go wrong. Cancer is one way that things can go wrong in mitosis. So the more you grow, the more cells you make, the more you end up sometimes having error. And if you don't get rid of these errors, it becomes cancer cells. So that, in fact, in all of us, even in me, there are cancer cells floating around. Why? Because that's part of biology. Nothing is perfect, right? There is problem when you multiply. But if you have good immune system, it picks up these cancer cells, take care of them, and you go on living normally. For some reason, there are some people whose immune system is not as good, then the cancer cell is not picked up, or they're not controlled, and it goes on totally rampant. So that is problem with increased what we call anabolic state. So when you keep eating, and your body and the cells keep dividing, things can go wrong. If you're fasting, your body realizes energy is not coming in. You better be smart about what you have. So in case of growing, it's like conserving. Take whatever you have. If you are having some molecules or cells are not working well, let's make them better. Let's fix it. Let's repair it. Don't discard it totally, but take what's good and then repair what's not good and make it whole again. So you are now in a state of reparation, repairing, maintenance, and also resistance. It's like you want to keep yourself strong, keep what you have, because you're not going to have much energy to do anything else. So that is what fasting does. So fasting is a state where the body is trying to be better without growing. So that is an interesting state. So you're switching from growing to maintaining. You can't keep growing without sometimes having problems. Obviously, you can't maintain all the time either. So there's a back and forth. So when you break your fast, you have energy come in, you grow a little bit, and then you fast again. So this back and forth seems to be the best way for us to maintain a long life and a healthy life. That's what some of the research is showing. Next, please. So why is that? Why do we evolve to do this? Well, let's go back maybe 20, 30,000 years. We're hunter-gatherers. Do we have 3 regular meals and snacks every day? No, right? So what do we do in between meals? We're trying to figure out where the food is, right? Figure out, okay, where to go to get some plants we can eat. What's a poisonous plant? What's a nutritious plant? If we're lucky, we spot a game. How do we hunt? How do we actually get meat? Those are the things that are really important for the hunter-gatherer. So when you're fasting, you got to use your brain. You don't use your brain, you're not going to be a hunter-gatherer. You're going to be one of somebody's meals, right? So it's very, very important. So evolution dictates that we are on our best terms, functioning either in our brain or physical being when we don't eat. That's the reason why when you eat too much, next thing you want to do, you sleep. Because you're trying to use the energy to grow and build cells. You can't be running around at the same time, right? So, I mean, it's not rocket science. Biology a lot of times is common sense. If you think about all we do is eat, is that really what our body is designed to do? No. But in Western society, that's what we do. 3 fixed meals, relatively big meals, snacks in between, and then what? You sleep. So if you look at it from that angle, something's not quite right. And also there's a thing about oxygen radical. So when we actually metabolize and eat and grow, sometimes there's these radicals, this oxidation process that is actually harmful to the cells. The DNA can be injured in various ways. Radiation is one of them, toxins another, but the other normal metabolism, when you have oxygen radical, that can go wrong. So when the DNA go wrong, that's when the cells start dividing abnormally. Now, if you don't catch them early, trouble. So that's what happens sometimes when you smoke. You have chemicals that damage the cells, the DNA structures, and you cannot repair it fast enough. That's what happened. Now, there may be some genetic basis to that, but nonetheless, having a state where you're constantly giving energy and nutrition to feed the body without properly slowing down and re-examining what you have gets you in trouble. So during fasting, the cells activate pathway that had intrinsic defenses against outside stress, and also removing the damaged molecules. So instead of letting the waste accumulate, when you fast, you actually take stock of what you have, repair what you can. If you cannot repair, get rid of it. That is important. Waste disposal is a very important concept in biology. Just like in your memory, if you remember every single thing that happened in the day and you never get rid of it, your brain is a clutter. So part of the reason we sleep, besides remembering things, is to discard the unnecessary things. It's almost like defragmentation in a computer. When you get rid of the things you don't need, you have space for things you do need. And also, you link them in arms so you can figure out what you need quickly. You can remember the essential stuff. But you have to make room, getting rid of things you don't need. It's the same concept in cells as well as your brain. So also, when you increase what we call the antioxidant defense, you make the cells stronger. So there are some human studies, unfortunately not a huge amount, but enough to show that if you have intermittent fasting, you can reduce the amount of what we call insulin resistant. If you look at diabetes mellitus, which is the most threatening disease in the 21st century, the statistic is staggering. If you are born right now in the United States, there's a 1 in 2 chance in your lifetime you will develop type 2 diabetes. It's a huge burden in our healthcare system, because with diabetes come increase in heart attack, increase in kidney failure, increase in stroke, increase in peripheral neuropathy and limb loss, on and on it goes. Also increase in dementia. The cost to our healthcare system is unbearable. We need to do something to reduce the risk of type 2 diabetes. Well, why do we have that? Obesity is certainly one of the big reasons. The other thing is our diet, what we eat. We talk about the high spiking sugars and all that. The other thing is high blood pressure. That and diabetes are the twin evils. They feed on each other. If you think about heart failure, you think about kidney failure, you have those two together, you're really at high risk. Hyperlipidemia, high cholesterol, that increases the risk of coronary disease, and also inflammation. So inflammation is the basis of disease state in stroke, heart attack, cancer, and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. That is the bane of our existence. In fact, increase the risk of aging. So if you reduce chronic inflammation, you are healthier. Simple as that. How do you do that? Actually, sleep more, number 1. Number 2, eat the right food. Number 3, exercise. Number 4, reduce stress. Now, keep in mind, none of that requires taking medicine. This is something totally within your capability. If you do that, those 4 things, if you do them well, you see a lot less doctors. I promise you that, right? But I think it starts with eating the right food. Because when you eat the right food, you have the energy to exercise. And also you can sleep better because you're not waking up as much. And number 4 is, with a better sense of well-being, you can handle stress a lot better. So it's all tied in together. Nothing is in of itself, isolated. So one interesting thing is if you actually fast, you have intermittent fasting or you lose weight prior to your surgery, your risk of having complications with surgery goes down. So if any of you ever contemplate bariatric surgery, one of the requirements is you lose weight first and you adopt intermittent fasting, because we know if you do that, your risk of complication afterwards goes down. So the surgeons sort of pretty much build that into their protocol. Next, please. So how do you do intermittent fasting? Well, very simple. There are 3 or 4 different ways. One of the easiest things is just to make a smaller window when you can eat. All right? So if you limit your food intake to maybe 6 to 8 hours during a 24-hour period, you pick when that is. All right? So if you say, I want my lunch at 1, my dinner at 7, then just in those 6 hours, eat what you can. Eat what you want. You don't even have to count calories. You can eat. But after that, no food. So from 7 to the next afternoon at 1, you fast. So if you think about that, most people probably can do it. Now, I don't think that you want to do it every day from the get-go, but you can gradually ease into it. So there's one way of doing it it was alternate days. So you can fast for one day, and you give yourself a break the next, and then you can do it again the third day. On and on it goes. You can do that. The third way is what we call 5 and 2. That is, you fast for 2 days. Now those 2 days, sometimes you have a lot less calorie intake than the other 5 days. So instead of just blocking it into 6 or 8 hours window of eating, you say, okay, in the first month, I'll eat 1,000 calories on those 2 days. The other 5 days, I eat what we call ad libitum, whatever you desire. You don't have to count calories. And then the next month, you go from 1,000 calories to 750 calories. So after you finish that, the third month, you go to 500 calories. And you can do that 1 day a week first, 2 days a week second, and maintain a 2 day a week thereafter. So as you do that, it's not a shock to your system. Your body can acclimate, and you feel better. First and foremost, the weight comes off. How much? It depends. Some people lose 10 pounds, some lose to 20, 30 pounds. But besides losing the weight, is that the amount of inflammation in your body goes down because you're eating healthier. Now, this is in the context of trying to eat a whole food, plant-based diet as much as you can. But you don't have to do it all. It's not a 100% or 0% thing. I'm doing probably 80, 90% whole food. And for me, it's good enough. Now, I can always do more if I desire to do that. But at this point in time, I'm having the benefits that I'm seeking. So all of you can decide for yourself what it is that you want to seek and what it is that you can do. And gradually. Now, it's not easy to do intermittent fasting if you're just starting cold at home. It's easier if you're working. My wife can tell you, if you're around food all the time, it's hard to say, I'm not going to eat for 16 hours. It's really, really hard. But if you're working, and I found that is easier, is that I'll just skip lunch. So if I finish dinner, say at 7 o'clock, and I got up in the morning, I usually have a cup of coffee, and I don't add milk to it now. And then I work through lunch hour, and by the time I go home, that's my fast. It's actually, as long as 20 hours or more. But in the meantime, when I'm working through those hours, my mind is very clear. In fact, I would say my mind is more clear in the afternoon than when I used to have lunch. It is very, very interesting. So the ketone bodies gives you tremendous amount of energy. The brain can extract the energy much easier from the ketone bodies. I don't know why, but that's my own personal experience. Now, there are some people that say, oh, I feel dizzy, or I feel really hungry, or sometimes, my wife said what is, hangry. So you're angry because you're hungry. Okay, so if that is the case, then eat something. So now I have a packet of nuts or trail mix in my briefcase. So I feel really hungry or I feel like potentially headache coming on, I have something to eat. So again, you can be flexible. But the idea is that when you do it longer and longer, your body is acclimated to it. So the fast to me now is something actually I look forward to because I know my mind will stay clear. And at the end of the day, you can weigh yourself. You can see how much weight you lose. It is funny. You can just, day to day, you can lose 2 pounds. If you just weigh yourself tonight, you wake up in the morning, you lose 1 pound. Because your body is continuously using energy. You have to. You have to burn the calories somewhere, right? But of course, when you eat, you can gain 3 pounds, depending on how much you eat. But the idea is that the weight itself is a dynamic concept. And honestly, the weight is not as important as your physical fitness, how well your body functions, what is your inflammatory state. All those things are part of the process of how you take care of your body. What you put in your body, how much exercise you do, how much sleep you have, right? How much stress. So emotional stress is another, big topic. But again, if you can have the right food, sleep the right amount, exercise the right amount, stress is much easier to handle. So, I think that's the end of my talk.
Thank you. Thank you, Doc. And before you disappear, maybe we want to have an opportunity, might be a few people that will have some questions. Bob, I'm going to give you the microphone and take it around, and maybe a few of you have questions that you want to ask Dr. Yu. And by the way, I wanted to just share with you, of course, Dr. Yu, the first time I saw you professionally, which would have been probably the fall of 2012, so you're looking at about a little over 7 years ago. You know how big I was, and you know my story, and it's interesting to hear what you say, because everything that you said about the benefits that you have personally experienced and others experience, that's my exact scenario. I mean, you know that I faced hypertension. I was on high blood pressure meds. I was in the advanced stages of prediabetes, all of those sorts of things. And with following the principles that you mentioned there, every single one of those have been mitigated. And I don't think I've had an opportunity to tell you this, but most recently, just before Thanksgiving, I did my labs. My total cholesterol was down to 134. My triglycerides, 51.
Wow.
I mean, just unbelievable results from making these lifestyle changes. And so, I understand the benefits. And what you say about losing the pounds and having the energy to now exercise. I don't have those same joint issues, the inflammation and those things that I didn't want to exercise because I couldn't. But now I feel good enough, and I got to do something with all that energy. So thank you so much for sharing and buttressing what we know is true about that. So we have some questions. Laura.
Yes.
Hi, Dr. Yu. I'm grateful that you came back and talked to us more about the sleeping process. And I find it fascinating because I've just been learning about intermittent fasting. And I've tried it. I did it for a few days. But I want to know what your thoughts are about, I know you said you feel clear-minded during the day when you're fasting during the day. I was wondering, since it's like 16 to 18 hours, do you use some of those hours through the night while you're sleeping, and then perhaps the 6 or 8 hours that you're awake, like you said, you eat maybe at 11 o'clock and then at 5 o'clock, and then you don't eat? And do you only eat 2 meals in that 6-hour period? Do you eat all 6 hours, or do you only eat 2 meals?
So I actually sometimes eat 1 meal, but if I have access to food, I might have, a snack around lunchtime. So I would say this: it's up to you whether you want to have just 1 big meal, 2 smaller meals, or even 3 smaller meals. But because your eating window is now down to 6 to 8 hours, you have the fasting state. The fasting state is where the ketone bodies come in. So more than 12 hours after you burn up all your glycogen store, that's when the ketones become liberated from your fat cells. So that is the state where you're now having all those benefits. The increase in metabolic resistance, the ability to actually repair your damaged molecules, that's what's important. And this metabolic switching is something you cannot get if you eat 3 meals a day with snacks.
But you can do that at night? Can you sleep through the night, making that part of your 18-hour fasting?
Absolutely.
Okay, we have any more questions? Any of you have any other questions you want to ask the doctor? Okay. Oh, in the back there. There's one more right there. Yes.
I was just wondering if, I got here late, but did you talk about a book you've written, or if you have a website where we can relearn what you talked about today? And
Well, actually, I preface by saying I'm not a nutrition specialist, so what I'm saying is my personal experience, but these are based on science. So you can certainly go to the New England Journal of Medicine and read up on intermittent fasting. That's the science of intermittent fasting. But there's different ways of doing that. You can go to the internet and look for intermittent fasting. Those are the three general protocols that people use. But you can do your own. If you can do it, right from the get-go, 16 hours, do it for 12 hours. And then gradually increase. As I said, you can do it 1 day a week for a few weeks, do 2 days a week, and then gradually. There are protocols you can extend over 4 months. You'll be amazed how easy it is after a few months, because it becomes part of your routine.
All right, good deal. Any other questions? If any of you have, I'm sure, any questions individually, perhaps you can ask the doctor after the meeting. We want to thank you so much for coming. I want you to notice something, Doc. There's something interesting. You talked about, when you were younger and when you were in Hong Kong and then moved to Canada. And I think there's something interesting that we all experience, because if you take a look around you, look at the age demographic that's here. You don't see the millennials sitting here. And sadly, what happens to us is that we don't start coming to grips with some of these issues until later in life. And unfortunately, when I was in my teens, when I was in my 20s, and even in my early 30s, and I started experiencing severe obesity, those kinds of things, I kind of felt like I was invincible. You don't think about things until you have those wake-up calls. And sadly, we wait for a crisis before we decide to react. What we want to do and introduce through See Me Fit is why wait for a crisis to happen. Make those kinds of lifestyle changes. Now, fortunately, I was not in the situation, I was never in the situation, doctor, where, I was facing the potential of, heart bypass surgery or whatever. I never came to that point, but my life was moving in that direction. And I had intervention before a crisis came. And, I'm very, very glad that kind of stuff happened. So it's very, very important to begin making those kinds of changes. So thank you so much, Doctor, for sharing your personal journey. And I'm hoping it was an inspiration to you tonight. Can we again thank him for coming?